Okay, it's recording.
Okay,
How has your day been so far?
hold on. There's a big thing in the middle of my screen here. It says the account owner can also watch this recording if it's stored in a cloud, any participant, et cetera, et cetera. These individuals can share recording and apps with others by staying in this meeting. You consent to being recorded. It has then gives me two choices: leave the meeting or gut it. I'm not sure which.
Wait, can you press got it?
Yeah. Should I touch that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
How was your day so far?
I'm pretty good. We got this far, which is a miracle, but how are you?
Pretty good.
All
How was
right,
your
let's go.
Christmas?
Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you, my dear.
You too. How was your Christmas?
Oh, it was very nice. Some of our children showed up and we had a very pleasant Christmas day. We missed our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, but we got some of them here anyway.
That's very cool. So, is it okay if you could tell me your life before World War II started, or before you entered the war?
Okay, well, it's obviously I'm a very old man and I would have to write for days and days to cover all of it. So I'll try to summarize it and make it as brief as possible and leave
Okay.
in just, I was born in Fitchburg, Massachusetts. That's Fitchburg with an F, F-I-T-C-H-B-U-R-G, Fitchburg, Massachusetts, on September 5th, 1925. My full name is William L. Casassa, and I was raised in Fitchburg, went to school in the Fitchburg school system, went to college early. I was graduated from my senior year in the middle of the senior year so that I could attend college, and I did so, and I did about a little over 2 years of semester hour credit study in 1 year, and then I was called. After I enlisted during that period, and I was called up for active duty on the 4th day of February, I believe it was, 1944. And after 17 weeks of very intense training in the Tank Destroyer unit at North Campwood, Texas, I then was assigned to a regular line outfit, is how we described them in those days, a battalion in this case, the 638th Tank Destroyer Battalion at Camp Gruber, Oklahoma. 6 weeks later, we shipped out of New York Harbor on our way to France. We arrived in France, and I think I've taken you up through what happened before the war, or our part of it. Now I'll take you through the war. We landed in France on September 15. We went into combat on the 18th day of November in support of two other units. One was the 84th Infantry Division as part of the 9th Army. And we also were in support at the very same time of the British Second Army, which was their lines and our lines joined together. We were the northernmost edge of the 9th Army. After fighting in the Siegfried Line, and that's where our initial entry into combat was the Siegfried Line, which was a defensive belt built along the western border of Germany. Very well planned, very well laid out, very difficult to penetrate. We fought there intensely until the 18th day of December, when we were removed from the line to rush down into Belgium to counteract and to discover where exactly the German penetration had taken place and how far, because this was the beginning of what became known as the Battle of the Bulge. Actually, it's recorded officially as the Ardennes campaign for the United States Army. And when we were there, hard to describe all of that, but believe it or not, even though the Germans had attacked with 2 complete Panzer armies, we didn't know exactly where they were. We knew where they were in part, but we knew that we had to discover them, establish full contact with them to stop them. And that took a while. The Battle of the Bulge was a very difficult campaign for everybody on both sides. Casualties were high. The weather was terrible and it got worse every day. I'm trying to summarize as quickly as I can.
It's okay. Yeah, I know that a lot of people, there were a lot of casualties during the Battle of the Bulge.
Yes, and there, I would point out, however, that there were a great many casualties during the fight through our attempt to get through the Siegfried line, and in places like the Hurtgen Forest, and I was not involved in the fighting at the Hurtgen Forest, but that was going on in the period directly prior to the German counterattack, which became the so-called Battle of the Bulge. So there was a lot of fighting and a lot of casualties a long time, constantly before that. But the Battle of the Bulge, it was very intense. And on both sides, the casualty list grew at a terrible rate. And when it was all over, nobody really knows how many casualties, because you can't completely define what was the Battle of the Bulge and what was part of something else. But mainly, the figures run in excess of 80,000 men. So it was the biggest land battle that the United States had ever been involved in, biggest single land battle.
Yeah, and it was also the bloodiest.
Yes, the casualties were terrific. And the weather was largely, or not totally, but it played a major role in those casualties, because men would be wounded in ordinary weather, say relatively easy weather, would die from shock much more readily in the intense cold, particularly since we did not have winter clothing. And that was a major oversight on the part of the Army not to have recognized that we would probably be fighting during the winter. And it was a very tough winter. It was one of the, they say, the toughest in 50 years. I don't know, I just know what they tell you. Excuse me. So after the Battle of the Bulge, which by the way, ended only in the sense that somebody decided that's the end of the Battle of the Bulge, because we kept right on fighting. There was no break in the contact with the enemy. But we yes, go ahead.
So someone said, hey, it's over, it's just over.
Well, that's how they defined the end of the Battle of the Bulge. We kept right on fighting, but they said, well, that's the end of the Battle of the Bulge. We got to call it the Ardennes campaign has finished, and now we are continuing with what we're doing, which was fighting right back from where we had been established prior to the counterattack by the Germans. So they didn't stop fighting. They just called it the end of the Battle of the Bulge. They just said this is where the campaign, that portion of our fighting that we refer to as the Ardennes campaign, finished on. I think they said February 28th. I'm not sure. It didn't make any difference to us because we were constantly engaged anyway. However, we did move from that position in Belgium back up into the Siegfried line in approximately the exact spot we had been when we pulled out of the Siegfried line to go down and fight in Belgium. The unit there moved out and so forth. They shifted units around and prepared for the next campaign, which actually was a continuance of the Rhineland campaign. So if you think of it like a painting, if you had a painting and then another painting on top of one section of it, that would be the Rhineland campaign, would be the background. The Ardennes campaign, kind of everybody tapered off from the Rhineland campaign and concentrated in fighting in Belgium. And when that was put back into good shape, then we continued with the Rhineland campaign. And in our case, it was, we had to cross the Roer, that's the R-O-E-R, the Roer River, excuse me, and had to jump the river, and that proved to be difficult and costly. And we fought our way from the Roer River all the way up to the Rhine. And that was the completion when we got to the Rhine, but I considered that to be the completion of the Rhineland campaign. We're still at war. The campaign had ended. A new phase started, which was referred to as the Central European campaign. And so after preparatory shelling and bombing and artillery preparations and so forth, we managed to jump the Rhine River. Now, by jump, I mean they had paratroopers actually jump on the other side of the river. At the same time, we attacked enough so that we could throw a bridge across. The combat engineers managed to get a bridge across. And when that happened, they got more infantry across. And when they got more infantry across, they enlarged the foothold on the eastern side of the Rhine so that they could get a better bridge thrown across. And the bridge was put across that would carry tanks and trucks and so forth. And my unit was a mobile unit, as I think I may have mentioned, was a 638th Tank Destroyer Battalion with the 84th Infantry Division. Went across there as soon as the bridge was big enough to handle tank destroyers and half tracks and vehicles of that size. And from that day on, we fought all the way across to and up to the Elbe River. And we had been given Berlin as our target, but the Russians had already surrounded Berlin by the time we got up to the Elbe, and they had taken quite a bit of the city, about a third of the city. So it made no sense for us to continue fighting up to the Elbe, since the Russians wanted complete credit, and they really did want complete credit for taking the city of Berlin. And as a matter of fact, when we stopped at the Elbe, it was only 2 or 3 days more, I believe, before the Russians had come up to the other side of the Elbe. They had taken, or were in the process of taking, finishing up the job of taking Berlin. So that is a thumbnail sketch of our combat experience. And if you wait a minute, I'll get you a card, which I'll show you, but I'll also mail it to you. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, here I am. I don't know how much you can see of that, but that's a picture of me when I was
Wait,
a
I
young
can't.
man.
Wait, I can't see it.
Can you see that?
Wait, can you move it to the right?
I'm sorry
Um,
to say.
Yeah, I can see it a little bit. Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, I'm sitting up on the cannon barrel, up next to the cannon barrel of a M18 tank destroyer vehicle. That's
Oh,
what
that's
our
very
unit
cool.
was. Yeah, and that was after the fighting had ended in Germany. And anyway, there's on the back of it is a description of what I just told you. So I can send this to you and you'll be able to read it. But it
Okay.
covers what I just said.
Mhm.
And it's got a picture of me when I was a young fella. That's
I
the
can
same
see it.
picture. Yep. Okay. And so I'll send that along, and you have that for your record. Will you tell me?
Okay.
Will you tell me what this is all about? I mean, why you're doing this?
Okay. So people of my generation don't know the sacrifices and risks people made to protect our country. It's also a way to celebrate the memory of my grandfather, who was a World War II Army medic who was stationed in Japan nearly at the end of the war. Yeah,
Good.
unfortunately, he passed away August of 2020.
Sorry to hear that, but we're all getting very
you.
old. Not many of us left, so you better listen while the chance is good.
Yeah, yeah, I'm just sorry that I couldn't figure out what he did during when he was in Japan, because all I know that he was drafted, he was a medic in the U.S. Army, and that's about it.
That's too bad. It'd be nice to know more, but he probably had an experience different in some respects, but much the same as mine. I was in there for 2 years. I was in combat for a long time. For out of the 2 years, I was about, well, probably 40% of my time was in combat. I was very fortunate. I was never wounded. We suffered, we being my platoon, and I can only speak for my platoon, which is a small group of men, and the tank destroyers would be 33 men, 4 tank destroyer vehicles, a half-track, an M6, and 10 men that were use those 2 vehicles. The security section means nothing to you, but that's what it was. And a total of 33 guys. So out of the 33 guys, we lost probably half of them. And the overall, we lost half the destroyers one day. So that's a 50% loss. Sounds terrible, and it is for the group, because there was you lost half the group. And so anyway, as I say, I was very fortunate. Didn't get scratched. Well, I guess I got scratched, but I didn't get really anything serious. So if there's anything else I can tell you, or if there's any other question you want to ask, please do, because we'll never get set up like this again. So.
I saw that at some point, a couple of months ago, you went back to Berlin, Germany with the Best Defense Foundation. Is it okay if you can tell me about that?
Sure, I'll be delighted to. That trip to Berlin was an unusual one. And it was, let's see, how can I describe it? There were 6 veterans in the group, just a small group. And none of us had ever met the other before. They were all from different units in the Army. 2 of us were tank destroyers, but from different battalions. And the wonder of it was that 2 of the guys were German Jews.
Oh yeah, I remember the Ritchie boys.
Yes, the Ritchie boys. They had escaped from Germany in the nick of time. One of them lost all of their family to the Holocaust, and
yeah,
one
I
of them,
remember.
and one lost several of his family. None of us had met before. Now, during the final campaign of the war, my unit, my division, now I'm talking about the 84th Infantry Division, took the city of Hanover. And in doing so, we liberated the Ahlem Concentration Camp. Now you understand, we did not know there was such a place. We were soldiers, we fought where we had to fight, but we didn't know everything that was going on. We certainly didn't know anything about that. My contact with the Ahlem camp was unique.
When I'm sorry, continue.
I was going to say that my platoon attacked, and the attack that morning was April 10th, 1945. My platoon attacked right past the corner of the Ahlem concentration camp. We, being just the 4 or 5 guys that I was close to in the same vehicle, We did not know anything about the extent of what the Germans were doing to the Jews in Europe. We had no idea it was that. We knew the concentration camps were tough prisons, tough, nasty prisons, terrible, but we had no concept of the extent to what they had gone to. And so when we went by that corner, we were very busy paying attention to the fact that we were in the attack. And we were watching and waiting for counter fire. So we weren't thinking about the concentration camp since we didn't know what it was there, but we did figure out it was some kind of a camp, some kind of a prison camp as we went by the corners because the tall posts and the tall fencing that was attached to the post. And one other thing happened as we got, or maybe the wind changed, I don't know, but suddenly we smelled the camp. And it was the most horrible smell I've ever smelled. I hope I never smell it again. I got a good chance now, I won't. But it was terrible, just terrible, horrible.
I can't imagine.
And we, later on, days before we found out why it smelled so bad, because our job was to attack and keep on attacking and take the city of Hanover, which we did. By the end of the day, we had it. And my unit continued on because we were highly mobile and we continued on past Hanover. Now, here's the thing. When we took Ahlem or liberated Ahlem, the rear echelon units, the units that come along with the battalion and the regimental and the division headquarters, they investigate everything. They go in to see what's what, and they found what the Ahlem camp really was. And and guess what? When we made the trip back to Berlin this past July, one of the Ritchie boys, that would be Professor, darn, I forgot his name. I have trouble with my memory on some things.
Was it Guy Stern or Paul Fairbrook?
Say again.
The Ritchie boys. I know there were two Ritchie boys who went to Berlin. Like the first one, his name is Guy Stern, and the second one was named Paul Fairbrook.
The first one would be
Guy Stern.
Stern, yes, Professor Stern. Family was annihilated in that camp. Now, what chance in the world would there be of, out of millions of men, that myself and Professor Stern would be in that same group of just 6 veterans that go back to Germany 75 years later and find out that the concentration camp that my unit liberated was the camp that his family was murdered in.
Yeah, it was
that.
Yeah, the Holocaust was a really sad time. 12 million people died during the Holocaust, and 6 million of the population were people who are Jewish.
Primarily, yes, absolutely. And so it was part of that whole horror. Now, as we fought across Germany, mainly my unit did not have much contact with German civilians. They usually had been evacuated from the area that we were attacking. And it wasn't until the fighting ended up near the Elbe River that we started to see large numbers of German civilians. And naturally, the thought then was, how could they allow this to have happened? How can these people who were part of a very civilized country allow that to happen? Well, there's a lot of reasons, and they at first we just didn't have anything but contempt for them. But then as time went by, we started to realize that they were victims just like the people that were murdered, because they were part of a group that was doing horrible things, and they had no longer had the ability to disengage from that. They were forced to be part of it.
Yeah, if I remember when after the First World War ended, Germany went to a depression-like era, and when Hitler came into power, he blamed the Jews for Germany's defeat in the First World War.
Yes, yeah, he used power politics where a few people could cow and intimidate large numbers so that they served his purpose. Anyway, when we went back, and I understand, I left Germany not too long after the fighting ended there to be sent over to, I was going to be sent over to Japan to fight and to take Japan. And of course, that meant my chances of survival were pretty slim, somewhere between slim and nowhere, as they used to say. And that was tough, but fortunately that didn't happen. But we were on our way home. We went home first, and then we were on our way to Japan for that purpose. Anyway, in the 75 years since I was in Germany, there's been three to four generations have grown up, really. And a generation is not necessarily 25 years, really more realistically, it's like 15 or 18 years. But here are these nice people, very nice people, had nothing to do with what happened with their grandparents and great-grandparents. And they are stuck with the same question. How could Germany have done such a thing? Well, they have adopted a very wise response to the whole situation, and I was impressed by that. They treated us, the veterans, as heroes for the German people because we liberated them from the Nazi regime, which is true, we did. And that's how they have dealt with it. They don't look at us as former conquerors at all. They look at us as liberators.
And heroes.
Yeah. For all of Europe, but particularly for themselves, the Germans. Not overlooking, but accepting the fact that their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents really had been weak and not resisting Hitler when they still had a chance. They've reached, I think, a very reasonable, it's the word I'm looking for, a reasonable an arrangement in their own minds and their own hearts of what happened and what their role in it was, or at least what their grandparents' role was. And they treat us just, it's amazing. I couldn't get over how the German people treated us. And we had articles written in the newspaper about us and this, that, and the other thing. It was really a remarkable experience, one to which I am eternally grateful to the Best Defense Foundation and its founders, and that's Donnie and Catherine Edwards. Wonderful people who take care of veterans on these trips as though they were made of crystal glass. So anyway, that's I'm glad you mentioned that about that trip, because it's a wonderful thing that the Best Defense Foundation does, and they do it with such skill and dedication. It's amazing. That entire trip was, I didn't have to spend a penny for it, except, well, I did buy some special travel insurance, but that's nothing compared to all the work that went into arranging that trip, because we did so much in a few days.
I also remember that you went to Pearl Harbor for its 80th anniversary. Yes,
we just got back there from that on the 9th of December. That was another amazing experience. And once again, my gratitude can't be overexpressed toward the Best Defense Foundation. They just did a wonderful job.
Yeah, I wish I went with them to Pearl Harbor.
Well, that was a totally different experience from the one in Germany. I mean, altogether different. For example, I didn't fight, in Pearl Harbor or Honolulu or anything like that. never went to the Pacific, thank God. But the experience at Pearl Harbor on this trip was one. I don't know how to even describe it. One experience after another, after another, after another. Some of them small ones, some of them the type of thing you do as you're a tourist. Some of them based on military activities. And of course, on Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, there was a great many formal ceremonies that we were the guests of honor at. And this time, it wasn't 6 guys, it was 63 veterans.
Yeah,
and
that was very impressive.
Yeah. And if I don't know just how many people in the group totally, but I would say there's at least 200 people were involved in getting the 63 veterans hither and yon. 4 great big buses to carry them around in. And there were a lot of photographers and video photographers there. And I expect we're going to see the results of that one of these months. And when that happens, maybe I can provide you with something, a copy of one of them, something like that. I don't know what we're going to get, but I'd be happy to do that if you'd like to.
Okay.
Okay. See, I'm looking at your letter. You asked me things like, did you have to work as a child? You bet I did. Were you married before you left for war? No, I enlisted when I was 17. I was called up for active service when I was 18, and I went overseas and turned 19 on the boat as we went over the Atlantic to France.
Wow.
So that's, no, I wasn't married. Sometimes it seems like I wasn't, but I wasn't. I volunteered, but that doesn't really mean that much because I would have been drafted anyway.
Mhm.
Maybe that. Well, I don't know. What was training like for me? Very, very hard, very difficult. It was.
Brutal.
They weren't sure what they were training us to do in the tank destroyers, because the tank destroyers themselves were a brand new branch that had never existed prior to the Second World War, and which at the end of the Second World War was disbanded, and they've never been in activities since that time. They just decided they didn't need tank destroyers because too many casualties, too much wealth, you might say, was spent for what was accomplished. And they decided it would be better to have tanks that were superior tanks to what they had and superior to the vehicles that the tank destroyers were equipped with, which were good vehicles in many respects, but really they weren't better than tanks, although their job theoretically was to destroy enemy tanks, hence the name tank destroyers. But the training was, wow, it was something else. You said something that I found interesting. You said, did you do anything before you and your unit went out to wire?
Yeah, it means going into enemy territory.
Well, that's perhaps, I think that's a phrase that probably developed during the Vietnam War. I suspect that comes from. There was no, the whole place was enemy territory in Europe. The Germans held everything. And of course, I landed after we'd taken almost all of France back. So from my standpoint, our unit, once we went into combat, we were always in the enemy territory. That's one thing that my unit had of distinction. We served, and I won't get into all the reasons why it worked out this way, it's a long story, but we served 171 consecutive days of full engagement with the enemy. In other words,
Wow.
once we went the line, there was no end of it for us. It just day and night, night and day for 171 days until till we got to the Elbe River. And that's when our commanders decided that we should stop there because the Russians were almost completed the job of taking Berlin. So that's that was all the time for us. Once you went in, you stayed in. You did. If you survived, well, you survived. If you didn't, well, that's it. Is there a fight or a battle you remember? I remember it all. I really do. I can't remember everything like I did before. Up until I was about, I'm going to say 65 years old, I could remember every day like it was turning a moving picture. It was, I couldn't imagine forgetting. Now, a lot of the memories, I remember them when and where and so forth, but they're no longer crystal clear. They're no longer technicolor memories, if you will.
They're a little bit fuzzy.
Your
memories are a little bit fuzzy.
My memory, as I say, it's clear, but it's not that day by
Not too
day.
clear.
There are a lot of things that are difficult to remember, but you know. You asked, was there a concentration camp you liberated? I've already told you that, Ahlem. What's the one thing from the war that you will never forget? I don't think I'll forget a great deal of the war. There's no one thing in particular. There are some things that stand out. Sometimes they stand out in my memory still because they're funny. A lot of humorous things happen in bad times. And a lot of other things are very bad things that stand out in my memory too. But I remember them all to a greater or lesser degree. I won no medals except the standard medals for the fighting for, you know, there was like the victory medal, for example, and a good conduct medal, a few things like that. But I never won a Bronze Star or a Silver Star for gallantry in action or anything of that nature. I did receive I'm trying to think of the proper name for it. It was
Accommodation?
It's let me think what it was called. Certificate of Merit. That's what it was. A certificate of merit for some action. But they had it all wrong. What they had given me the award for really didn't happen that at all. What they should have had, they had written me up, my platoon leader had written me up for the Silver Star. And according to the platoon sergeant, they had submitted it, but it had been mysteriously turned down because battalion headquarters had given itself too many decorations, and the division headquarters, which control these things, decided that they not going to give that many awards, and so they gave me and some other guys certificates of merit regarding a certain action that didn't occur the way they had it written up. So it's one of those things. What was your life like after the World War ended? Well, first of all, I was the happiest man in the world. I was so glad to have survived the war. Nothing bothered me. I was happier than you can't imagine how happy I was. And didn't care anything about the war or the army or anything else. I just want to get out, get home, get started again, get to chasing girls and misbehaving. So I went back to school. I got out, I was released from the army on a Saturday evening. I came home on Saturday evening, and Monday morning I was back in class because we lived right across the street from the college, and I went back there for that spring semester, and then took the summer off. Had a wonderful summer, and went back to school in the autumn in a different school in a different city. And after a full year of quite an intense study, all in
Which city
science.
did you go to? Which city did you go to?
Went to Philadelphia. I went to the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy and Science, which was the leading school of pharmaceutical science at that time, leading in the country. Nobody ever questioned that. Tough to get in, very tough to get in, and tough to stay in too. Anyway, that was the end of my career in school. I had something in excess of the number of semester hours that were required for a degree, but I was going to have to go back to school for another year in order to get the credits from the two schools combined into a degree from one school. And I just didn't have the patience for it. So I didn't go back to school. I went and got a job. And I was tired of living on $1.15 a week, which is what I was living on when I was going to school. And that includes, that was my meal, transportation, cigarettes I smoked in those days. $1.15 was what I had to spend, and that's all I had to spend. So I was anxious to start living again, and went on from there and had a career in sales, and worked my way up through the sales part of the companies, and eventually had an executive position, and that's what I was doing when I retired. I had a good life, and I was very fortunate. I met and married Marguerite Trainer, who was a young lady who was raised in Washington, D.C., and that's where I met her. And that's where we raised a family of 4 children. All of them were born in the Washington Sanitarium, that's the name of the hospital, on Piney Branch Road in D.C. And then I took a transfer in the company and moved to Kansas City, where we still live in the Kansas City area. And it's a wonderful, wonderful town, a wonderful metropolitan area, a great place to live. And consider myself very fortunate to have been transferred here and not to some of the other towns that have become so decrepit. We've been married 66 years, I would add, and we have the good fortune to have adequate good health to still be alive and be together. Let's see. I will tell you, to jump back a little bit to the trip to Berlin. You asked a question about the Wannsee conference. That conference was, and I think you know quite a bit about it, or you wouldn't have asked about it, but that conference was held in an absolutely stunningly beautiful estate on the shore of the Lake Wannsee that is right on the edge of Berlin. And it was attended by a group of high-ranking Nazi officials. I believe there were 17 of them. There may have been more or less, but that's the number that sticks in my mind. They had already, each of them had the officials that were reported to them, all the substructure of the government agencies. They were the head of all the different agencies. And they met that day in this large conference room. It's a large room with a great, beautiful wooden table. And those men represented the heads of the various branches of the Nazi power structure.
Oh, like Joseph Goebbels. I think that's how you pronounce it. Like when you said high-ranking Nazis, do you mean like Joseph Goebbels?
Yeah, I don't know that Joseph Goebbels was there. He was, of course, in charge of propaganda, and he controlled all the newspapers and all of that. And he may have been there. I don't know. I guess I heard some of the names of some of the people there. What is significant, however, is the fact that they all presented their paper, and their papers, of course, summarized what their branch of the government was going to do and how it would do it. And the combined operations of these people would be to murder 6 million Jews. In that room, they sat down together, they signed that paper, and we were in that room. And I realized we were in the room where 6 million human beings were murdered right there when they signed those papers, because once they signed the papers, everything else was just machinery, was just going to happen. And not only that, but once they signed the papers, then they ordered a lovely breakfast, and they had a lovely breakfast, and then they went back to their offices. Cold-blooded activity, a monstrous thing that they did. And to be in that room just impressed me because, and by the way, the estate was an estate that was owned by a Jewish family who were very wealthy. And of course, the Nazis had taken the estate away from them. And they took everything away from them, and then they took their lives away from them. Very thorough, very thorough. What people.
Yeah,
So,
it's amazing what mankind could do to other people.
I'm sorry, dear. Say
It's
again.
amazing what mankind could do to other people.
Yeah, basically they had this concept that everybody else except for the German race were inferior. There was various degrees of inferiority. Some people they treated you wouldn't treat an animal the way they treated the Jews.
Yeah, I remember
and it
Hitler
wasn't
said,
just
sorry. No, I remember Hitler said that anyone who has blonde hair and blue eyes were were okay, which was ironic because he had brown hair and brown eyes.
Yes, yes, that's right. They were the Teutonic perfection, blue eyes and blonde hair. And there wasn't one of them that was blue-eyed and blonde. Of those 17 people, I don't think there was a blue-eyed blonde in the group. I think, you put your finger on something, sheer irony of that situation is amazing, just amazing. I don't know if it ever occurred to them how silly they looked when they made that kind of intent, but anyway, yeah. There's some pips in there. There's some real weird people too. I mean, really strange people. That's what made the Nazi party so unclean, so to speak. They had, well, you put your finger on it. They surely missed the irony or didn't care that they were the very things that they were supporting with words was contrary to the facts of themselves. So, okay, well, I can't think of anything else here that we haven't talked about. I guess we have or referred to it. But if you have questions.
I actually have one last question.
Sure.
When you went to the concentration camp that you liberated, did you happen to meet a survivor from that camp?
No, I want to emphasize something. When we attacked the city of Hanover, we were concentrating on taking the city of Hanover. Freeing the concentration camp was coincidental. It happened. We didn't even know in my unit. Now, once again, I got to tell you, everything I say to you reflects just what I've seen in my unit. We went by the corner of the camp, not knowing it was a concentration camp. We knew it was some kind of camp to keep people penned in because we could see the fence. And we went right by the corner as we were attacking. Now, our focus was the attack, not and all I remember about it is the tall fence and then the terrible, terrible stench that assaulted us as we went by. It was so dreadful. And then later on, now you understand, we kept going. Our rear echelon troops were the ones who went into the concentration camp and found the bodies and found the tortured troops, the whole sickening mess.
Yeah.
And then we heard, but we were busy fighting. So this information seeped up to us little by, and then when the fighting ended, in about another month, we heard a lot more of it, of course. And we had released, or we had liberated several other camps. I don't remember one off the top of my head. One was filled with women. Everybody in that camp was women, and there were a lot of whips piled up in a room in the camp. That I saw myself. So I really don't know much on a first-hand basis about the concentration camps, but I was by them, near them, as I say, smelled them. At least one we smelled, and then there were others. But we're not busy taking the camp. We're busy taking ground from the Germans. So I never met anybody, talked to anybody. I could have talked to some of the women, I guess, in that concentration camp, but I had no reason to want to. Didn't. I've had a lot of questions about the concentration camps, and I'm always feel like I'm shortchanging the person who's asking the question because I don't have a lot of firsthand knowledge about the camps. It's mostly second, but I got enough firsthand knowledge that makes everything else I heard very real and very believable. And of course, everybody's seen the pictures, pictures of people of the time, like the pictures of Eisenhower and his staff going through a camp just a few days later than that. And so it's laughable when you hear people saying it never happened. Oh, geez. Lord, I'd give them a little sniff of one camp, change their mind in a hurry.
Yeah, I'm like why are you saying the Holocaust didn't happen? It did. Like have you ever heard the 12 million people who were victims from the Holocaust? I'm like, seriously,
Well,
like it's really upsetting that people say it's fake, it didn't happen. It's just sad.
oh, it's silly. I mean, they're silly people. Do they imagine those 12 million, those 6 million Jews evaporated? I mean, it's just you know, it's bizarre. Okay, if you get some other question.
Would you go back to Berlin again?
Well, first of all, I should say I would not. I would if I were given. I couldn't afford to do it myself. So first of all, I'd have to be invited, just as I was in the case of this trip. Keep in mind that when I went to Berlin this past July with the Best Defense Foundation, that was the first time I've been in Berlin. Remember, I told you we stopped fighting at the Elbe River, and the Russians took over from Berlin. They took all of Berlin, and they took the land between Berlin and the Elbe River. So we got shipped out of Germany, I don't know, three or 4 weeks later, and we're on our way back to the States. And in fact, I was back in the States and on recuperation furlough at home the day that the war ended in Japan, on VJ Day. I was on furlough at home, but I would have continued on. When my furlough was up, I continued on to Camp Benning, Georgia, Fort Benning, Georgia, and had to continue to serve until the following February. But the war had ended, so that meant that I was now not going to fight anymore, period. And that was good news, to say the least.
Were there any ceremonies that you went to honoring you and other World War II veterans?
Well, they did honor us indeed, by first of all, by being so kind as to choose us to go on the trip. And I'm not sure how that came about. I have no idea why I was chosen. And I'm not sure why any one of them was chosen. They must have had a reason for each one of us. I'm not sure what it was. I'm hopeful that there'll be another trip to Belgium. I would really like to visit Belgium again. I've been there one time since the war, but the people in Belgium and in the towns, the city officials didn't know I was there. They had no reason to know. One more tourist, you know. But had they known that I was with the 84th Infantry Division and that I had fought there, I think they would have provided us with a considerable degree of hospitality. But they didn't. I didn't make any effort to contact anybody because I didn't know that they were so anxious to the Belgian people were so anxious to please, to say thank you, so to speak. So I'd like to get back there again. This time I would be able to show other people who have not been there some of the interesting things that went on and the exact spot where they happened, because I was involved in that during the fighting. I didn't fight in Italy. Italy was a real tough place. Italy,
It
fighting
was?
in, very, very, very tough. It's if you think about it, Italy is a long, long mountain. It extends out into the Mediterranean, but it's mountainous from one end to the other. Now, if you want to attack a country, you don't want to have to attack mountains. Difficult of supply, it's highly defendable territory. Nothing easier to defend than mountainous territory. And we, the American Army and the British Army and Australian units and a Polish unit and I don't know if there's Canadians fought there or not, I forgot, fought. And the main army was the American Army under General Clark. They fought up the mountain range, and that's the easiest place for the Germans to build and to utilize defenses, and make you pay a terrible price for taking it, and we did. That's why you had you've heard of Anzio, I'm sure.
I think so.
Yes, I'm sure you did. And Anzio was in itself, it's just one battle, but it was one long one, and it's one of extreme difficulty where the army that landed, they landed in practically a basin, relatively flat, and everything around it was hilly and then mountainous. And to get out of there was quite a task. The Germans were able to fire from high ground into the low ground from every angle. There wasn't a bit of the Anzio I'm trying to think of the right word. The foothold that we had, that's what Anzio was. It was a coastal landing. It was well, it was essentially a foothold on the side of Italy. And but they're totally exposed. There wasn't a bit of Anzio that couldn't be hit by enemy fire. So just being there was terribly difficult. And we paid a high price for it, a very high price. I had no part of that. I know about it, I've read about it. I heard about it lots of, it came in the news. Well, it wasn't until I had a chance to talk to guys who lived in my hometown, as a matter of fact, who had fought there. And well, anyway, I guess the point that I'm making is that it's, when we talk about fighting in Europe, there's so much of it that took place that people never really heard then, and mostly they've not heard now, and they won't, unless they happen to stumble across something in a history book and are interested in it and make an effort themselves to find out what happened. For example, just immediately before the Battle of the Bulge, we were fighting in the Siegfried Line, and that was considered to be part of the Rhineland campaign. But at the same time, there was very heavy fighting in a place called the Hürtgen Forest. The Hürtgen Forest is in an area sort of between that part of the Siegfried Line, where it goes off at an angle, and the part of Belgium where the Battle of the Bulge developed. So Battle of the Bulge was such a I don't want to say a defeat, but the Germans really knocked us back on our heels. And that should never have happened, but it did happen. So the 30 or 35 or 40 days of intense fighting that took place in the Hürtgen Forest that just chewed up one unit after another was hardly heard of. And it's a pity because that was some of the toughest, most brutal, bloody fighting of the entire war, and most people never heard of it, which is shameful, but that's how it is. There's a lot of things in war. It's just how it is, you know. There's nothing you can do about it. But come on, any more questions?
I think that was all of them.
Well, if you have some more that you're curious about, and it comes to you later on, why don't you just get me on the telephone?
Okay.
You can add that to whatever you've got here in the interview that you think is worth. And by the way, is this a project for the Scouts, or is this?
Yeah, Girl Scouts.
Now, are you a Girl Scout ambassador?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're a good one, I'll tell you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's been a delight talking to you. Hope I didn't talk too much.
You did okay.
Good, thank you. I'll bid you good day and good luck, and
Happy New Year.
have a very happy new year.
Happy New Year.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.